Hello again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. I found earlier today, while watching a broadcast by the cable news network, that one of the longest serving justices of the US Supreme Court, and I believe that she was the oldest, biologically the oldest justice on the US Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, passed away yesterday on September the 18th, 2020, aged 87. She had been battling cancer and had had other health problems as well. Former US President Bill Clinton appointed her back in 1993. So this creates another vacancy, and given the US political system's increasing partisanship at the federal level and the fact that we're just weeks away from the next US presidential elections, which will be held on November the 3rd, 2020, and that it's a tight election campaign, it is very likely that the next associate justice to replace the late Justice Ginsburg will only take office in 2021. In fact, 4 days before she passed away, she told her granddaughter that her dying wish was that she would not be replaced by the current US President, Donald Trump's appointee. She was a rather liberal justice in her rulings, favoring, for example, abortion rights, gender equality, and affirmative action. So let's look at her biography. She was born on March the 15th, 1933, as Joanne Ruth Bader, also known by her initials RBG. So she was generally viewed as belonging to the US Supreme Court's liberal wing. She was the second woman to serve on the US Supreme Court after Sandra Day O'Connor, who incidentally was appointed by the late Republican US President Ronald Reagan back in 1981. Following O'Connor's retirement in 2006, and until Sonia Sotomayor joined the US Supreme Court in 2009, to be followed by Elana Kagan in 2010, she was, during that 3-year time, the only female justice on the US Supreme Court. During that time, she became more forceful with her dissents from the US Supreme Court's conservative-leaning majority. They were noted by legal observers and in popular culture. She did author notable majority opinions, including United States versus Virginia in 1996. The US Supreme Court in that ruling struck down the long-standing male-only admission policy of the Virginia Military Institute in a 7-1 decision. Olmstead versus LC regarding discrimination against people with mental disabilities. The US Supreme Court held in that opinion, or ruling rather, that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, individuals with mental disabilities have the right to live in the community. Friends of the Earth Incorporated versus Laidlaw Environmental Services, 2000, was a US Supreme Court case that addressed the law regarding standing to sue and mootness. She was born and grew up in New York. Her older sister died when she was still a baby, and shortly before she graduated from high school in the early 1950s, her mother passed away. She then earned her bachelor's degree at Cornell University and became a wife to Martin D. Ginsburg and mother before starting law school at Harvard University, where she was one of the few women in her class. Ginsburg transferred to Columbia Law School, where she graduated tied for first in her class. Following law school, Ginsburg entered into academia and was a professor at Rutgers Law School and Columbia Law School, teaching civil procedure as one of the few women in her field. She spent a considerable part of her legal career as an advocate for the advancement of gender equality and women's rights, winning multiple arguments before the US Supreme Court. In 1980, then US President Jimmy Carter appointed her to the US Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, where she served until former President Bill Clinton appointed her to the U.S. Supreme Court. She received attention in the American popular culture for her fiery liberal dissents and refusal to step down, leading to her being dubbed the notorious RBG. She died of metastatic pancreatic cancer at her home in Washington, D.C. yesterday on September the 18th, 2020. So in June 1993, then U.S. President Bill Clinton appointed Judge Ginsburg to replace the retiring Justice Byron White. She had been recommended to Clinton by then U.S. Attorney General or Federal Justice Minister Janet Reno after a suggestion, incidentally, by Utah Republican Senator Orrin Hatch. At the time of her nomination, Ginsburg was viewed as a moderate. Clinton was reportedly looking to increase the court's diversity, which Ginsburg did as the only Jewish justice since the 1969 resignation of Justice Abe Fortas. She was the second female and the first Jewish female justice of the Supreme Court. Elana Kagan is also a Jew by her heritage, while Sonia Sotomayor is a Hispanic American. And eventually, the late Justice Ginsburg became the longest-serving Jewish justice ever. During her subsequent testimony before the U.S. Senate Committee on the Judiciary as part of the confirmation hearings, she refused to answer questions about her view on the constitutionality of some issues such as the death penalty, as it was an issue she might have to vote on if it came before the court. The U.S. Senate confirmed her by a nearly unanimous vote, 96-3, on August the 3rd, 1993. She received her commission on August the 5th and took her judicial oath, administered by then U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice William Rehnquist on August the 10th, 1993. Her name was later invoked during the confirmation process of the current U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts in 2005. Ginsburg herself was not the first nominee to avoid answering certain specific questions before Congress, and as a young attorney in 1981, Roberts had advised against U.S. Supreme Court nominees giving specific responses which, well, could either stigmatize them or then tie their hands, figuratively speaking. And then, of course, if later they, because of their desire not to be the sole or one of the few dissenting justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, they would be then accused of flip-flopping on issues, changing their values and principles. Nevertheless, some conservative commentators and senators invoked the phrase Ginsburg precedent to defend his demurrers. Ginsburg characterized her performance on the court as a cautious approach to adjudication. She argued in a speech shortly before her nomination to the court that measured motions seemed to me right in the main for constitutional as well as common law adjudication. Doctrinal limbs too swiftly shaped, experience teaches may prove unstable. Legal scholar Cass Sunstein has characterized the late Justice Ginsburg as a rational minimalist, a jurist who sought to build cautiously on precedent, in other words, previous decisions, especially landmark ones, rather than pushing the Constitution towards her own vision. So in that sense, it seems that she countered the conservative and especially right-wing Republican and populist Republican argument according to which Democratic justices and judges, especially those of the party's liberal wing, want to legislate from the bench. In other words, interpret the US Constitution so expansively as to be, in effect, unelected legislators. With the retirement of Justice John Paul Stevens, who had been appointed by the late US Republican President Gerald Ford back in 1975, Ginsburg became the senior member of what is sometimes referred to as the court's liberal wing. When the U.S. Supreme Court was split 5-4 along ideological lines and the liberal justices were in the minority, Ginsburg often had the authority to assign authorship of the dissenting or minority opinion because of her seniority. She was a proponent of the liberal dissenters speaking with one voice and, where practicable, presenting a unified approach to which all the dissenting justices could agree. She rather consistently wrote opinions which opposed gender discrimination. She also called attention to the reluctance women possibly have in male-dominated fields. Well, for example, business management, transportation, mining, security, police, the army, and so forth. And well, of course, religious leaders and ministers of the gospel or of other religions, to making waves by filing lawsuits over small amounts of money, choosing instead to wait until the disparity accumulates. Ginsburg discussed her views on abortion and sexual equality, in an interview she gave to the New York Times newspaper in 2009. In that interview, she stated that abortion is a basic human right for women, in that the government has no business making that choice for a woman. Although she consistently supported abortion rights and joined in the U.S. Supreme Court's opinion striking down Nebraska's partial birth abortion law in Steinberg versus Carhart, 530 U.S. 914 in 2000, on the 40th anniversary of the court's ruling Roe versus Wade, 410 U.S. 113 from 1973, she criticized the decision in Roe as terminating a nascent democratic movement to liberalize abortion laws, which might have built a more durable consensus in support of abortion rights. Although Ginsburg did not author the majority opinion, she was credited with influencing her colleagues on the case Safford Unified School District versus Reading, 557 U.S. 364 in 2009. The court ruled that the school went too far in ordering a 13-year-old female student to strip her bra and underpants so female officials could search for drugs. In an interview published before the court's decision, Ginsburg shared her view that some of her colleagues did not fully appreciate the effect of a strip search on a 13-year-old girl, because, 13-year-olds are somewhere on the borderline of childhood and adolescence. Technically, if their physiological and especially emotional development has been normal, they could be classified as young adolescents, but they are by no means yet mature adolescents. And there are a considerable number of rather childishly behaving 13-year-olds. On the other hand, there are also a considerable number of rather precociously and maturely behaving 13-year-olds. As a long-time teacher, I have quite much experience, and a long-time substitute teacher as well. I have quite a long-time experience of teaching also 13-year-olds as well as younger students. In Herring versus United States, 559 U.S. 135 in 2009, Ginsburg dissented from the U.S. Supreme Court's decision not to suppress evidence due to a police officer's failure to update a computer system. Ginsburg also advocated the use of foreign law and norms to shape U.S. law and judicial opinions, a view rejected by some of her conservative colleagues. Ginsburg supported using foreign interpretations of law for persuasive value and possible wisdom, not as precedent which the court is bound to follow. So she seems to have been a moderate internationalist. At his request, Ginsburg administered Vice President Al Gore's oath of office to a second term during the second inauguration of Bill Clinton on January the 20th, 1997. She was the third woman to administer an inaugural oath of office. Usually it's an associate justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Normally it's an associate justice of the U.S. Supreme Court who administers the oath of office to the US Vice President elect, while it is the Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court if he is able to attend the inauguration, who administers the oath of office by tradition, not by law or constitution, to the US President elect. Rather sad example of this tradition happened in January 2005 at the second inauguration of then US President George W. Bush, when then Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court William Rehnquist, who would pass away under 8 months later in the first week of September 2005, administered the oath of office. He walked slowly to the podium and then left immediately after the oath had been administered. He refused, despite his terminal illness, to resign as the US Supreme Court's Chief Justice, and thus became one of the US Supreme Court's Chief Justices to die in office, while the late Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg became one of the Associate Justices to die in office. The most recent case was in February 2016, when during a weekend holiday trip to Texas, US Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonin Scalia died in his sleep, apparently either of a heart failure, heart attack, or a stroke. Ginsburg is believed to be the first US Supreme Court justice to officiate at a same-sex wedding in August 2013. Despite their ideological differences, Ginsburg considered Scalia, who was considered one of the most conservative recent US Supreme Court Associate Justices, her closest colleague on the court. They often ate together and even attended the opera together. During 3 separate interviews in July 2016, Ginsburg criticized then presumptive Republican presidential nominee and the current US President Donald Trump, telling the New York Times and the Associated Press that she did not want to think about the possibility of a Trump presidency. In 2018, she expressed her support for the Me Too movement against women's sexual harassment. She told an audience, "It's about time. For so long, women were silent, thinking there was nothing you could do about it. But now the law is on the side of women or men who encounter harassment, and that's a good thing." She married her husband, Martin D. Ginsburg, in 1954. Their daughter, Jane Ginsburg, born in 1955, is a professor at Columbia Law School, while their son, James Stephen Ginsburg, born in 1965, is the founder and president of Cedille Records, a classical music recording company based in Chicago, Illinois. During her life, she was a grandmother of 4 grandchildren. Although the late Justice Ginsburg was raised in a Jewish home, she became non-observant regarding Judaism when she was excluded from the minyan, that is the minimum number of Jews, 10 Jewish adults for mourners after the death of her mother. There was a house full of women, but Bader as a woman was excluded. Orthodox Judaism requires that 10 Jewish men over the age of 13, having gone through the Jewish male bar mitzvah or son of the law ceremony and thus being considered religiously adults, be present for a minyan, and women are excluded from being counted. Following her appointment to the US Supreme Court in 1993, Ginsburg deviated from the traditional American court dress by wearing a French robe, or robe d'avocat, or lawyer's robe, as opposed to the typical judicial robe worn in the United States. In 1999, she was diagnosed with colon cancer. She underwent successful surgery and chemotherapy and radiation therapy. And during the process, she did not miss a day on the bench. In February 2009, she was operated on for pancreatic cancer. She had a tumor that was discovered at an early stage. In November 2018, she fell in her office at the US Supreme Court, fracturing 3 ribs, for which she was hospitalized. An outpouring of public support followed. In August 2019, she was able to return to the US Supreme Court in February 2019. And then 6 months later, in August 2019, the US Supreme Court announced that Ginsburg had recently completed 3 weeks of focused radiation treatment to ablate a tumor found in her pancreas over the summer. Yeah, remove or destroy. She died from complications of pancreatic cancer on September the 18th, 2020, at age 87. Following her death, over $1.5 million was donated to Act Blue, which is a non-profit technology organization established in June 2004 that enables left-leaning nonprofits, Democrats, and progressive groups to raise money on the internet by providing them with online fundraising software. When John Paul Stevens retired in 2010, Ginsburg became the oldest justice on the court at age 77. Her husband passed away in June 2010. And indeed, she stated that her work on the US Supreme Court was helping her cope with the death of her husband. She also expressed a wish to emulate the first Jewish American US Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis's service of nearly 23 years, which she achieved in April 2016. She also stated that she had a new model to emulate in former colleague Justice John Paul Stevens, who retired at age 90 after nearly 35 years on the bench. At the time of her death yesterday, Ginsburg was at age 87 the 4th oldest serving US Supreme Court justice in the history of the country. Ginsburg has been referred to as a pop culture icon. Her increasingly fiery dissents from the US Supreme Court's conservative-leaning majority, particularly in Shelby County versus Holder 570 US 2 in 2013, led to the creation of the notorious RBG Tumblr and internet meme comparing the justice to rapper the Notorious B.I.G.